Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going to be looking at how to build Charlie's Chocolate Factory website. Yes, the Charlie with his chocolate factory, right? He's tasked us with building it, so let's go about doing it. And in the last video we talked about things like simple Docker containers, non-root users, the env file, and of course the Docker file structure, right? So if you missed all that, have a look at the other video and it will go into a bit more detail. Quite a fun video. Did quite enjoy making it, but I want to try and keep this video short, so 15 minutes, so that way we don't get bored. Right. So how do you build a Docker container? Well, first of all, you need the application, right? So in our case, it's the chocolate.py file, right? This one here, and then we have next, which is a Docker file, right? So in this particular video, what we're going to be doing is using Python to build it. So I'm going to be using Flask, right? So from Flask, import Flask. And I'm going to be explaining kind of a little bit as to how this works, right? I'm using Visual Studio Code. You can download Visual Studio Code from the Microsoft website. It's code.visualstudio.com. Click on download and then go from there, right? In fact, I'll show you what that looks like. Right, so down here. There we go. Okay, so from here, Visual Studio Code, download. Click on this and that will give you Visual Studio Code. Follow the on-screen instructions and you'll be fine. Right, Python is what we need now. We go to Python, downloads, download Python 3.13 if you're using Windows. If you're using Linux, it's generally built in. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're on Windows, you do. And then on here, what I recommend is that when you do the installation, make sure that you tick that the path is enabled. And what that means is when you try to execute it on things like PowerShell, you can do so. So what does that mean, execution? What do you mean by that? It means that we're just running something. We're just running something. So it just makes it available to run by putting it in the path. Yeah? If you don't know where you are going to Manchester, right, then you're not going to know where to go, right? And that's basically what the computer is saying. By having it in the path, it knows where to go and look for something. Okay, cool. That part's done. So if we look at this part, we've got from Flask import Flask, app equals Flask underscore name. That's just a variable which says that the name of the application is going to be Flask name based. Okay, and just looking at this part from Flask import Flask, what it means is that there's a module called Flask, and from that module we're finding a submodule called Flask. So if you think about it as tools within a toolbox, yeah. So import the toolbox, and from that toolbox, find the hammer. What would that look like in code? It would say from hammer, import toolbox. Okay, simple, straightforward. Let's move on to the app.root. App.root, all that means is that depending on where you want to go, so when you go to something like vincentjules.com, it says what is the root. Okay. If it's a slash like this, it means it's the home page, right? Because it's the root page. If it's something like slash.rings, or more precisely /rings, right? So I'll give you an example. www.vincentjules/rings means it's going to the rings page, right? Simple, straightforward. From there, we then say def.chocolate menu. That's a function. That function is essentially chocolates, which is our list of stuff. And because we have a list of stuff there, what it means is that it's milk chocolate, hazelnut, dark chocolate, ruby, all that sort of thing. So, you know, if Charlie's trying to build his chocolate factory, you know, and he's got investors, he probably wants a website. So he's tasking us with that mission, right? Now, he might be selling things like milk chocolate, hazelnut, dark chocolate, ruby, white chocolate, all that kind of stuff. All great. Now, by doing that, we now have the ability to create that list for him. So this is a list that's being created. So if you think about like a shopping list, this is kind of what's in there, right? The overall list itself is called chocolates. That's the variable that's assigned to it. Yeah. So now, by using a return, what we're saying is we can create a HTML page, which is what we're doing here. And inside we're saying H1 is the header, P is paragraph, UL is the unordered list, right? So now what we're doing is we're going through this particular shopping list of stuff and saying, right, okay, I can see what it is, but I need just one part of it, right? So I need like the top part, which will be index 0, which is milk chocolate. The second part is index 1, which is hazelnut. Index 3, dark chocolate. Index 4, ruby chocolate, whatever that is. White chocolate is going to be the fifth part, right? So when we do the for loop, what we're saying is that I want, within that list, give me each individual component of that list, right? Like we discussed from the index. So I go 0, right, which will be milk chocolate, is now going to be the first part in my HTML code as milk chocolate. So what does that look like? It will look like this, right? Dash milk chocolate. Right? Now you get the idea of what's going to happen next. It's going to be milk chocolate, hazelnut, dark chocolate, right? 1, 2, 3. Or if you're in the computer term, 0, 1, 2. Okay, cool. If main, all this is saying that if you have a module or a script, you can do either or, doesn't really matter. And it allows you to use it in both a script and in another Python file / module, right? So when you create another Python file, you can import this file and then use like the function chocolate menu, or you can use it as a standalone script. That's what it's saying. App.run host 000 port 5000 means that when the application is run, so in other words, this application part that we're running here, when we run it, it will run on this machine at port 5000. Or more specifically, it's a default route, which means that it'll run anywhere, because it's not dependent on what type of address it runs, because that's called an address. Okay, and that goes into networking. So you have like 4 octets, and then this means that each individual octet is set to 0, which means it's no value. It means it's a default route, and then runs on the port of 5000. Okay, don't worry about what I just said about the default route, because that's all networking. That'll come in a later video. All you need to know is that it's a default route, which means that it will run anywhere at port 5000. Okay? That's it. So that is our application. Next, what we have to do is build our Docker file. So I'm going to go and open up my Docker file that I created earlier. Open that up. But in here, you'll see that we talked about some of the concepts that from before, right? We talked about using slim images, right? Because they are less bloated. They have less things in it, which means that the Docker context can be run faster. Now the workdir. I want to introduce as a different concept. The workdir I want to think about more like this drawer, right, that I have here. I don't know if you can see it. I'm just going to double check. Okay. So this drawer behind me, yeah? There you go. That drawer behind me. Right? If you compare it back to what we talked about with the Docker versus VM, yeah, so the containers versus VM, that Chester drawer is like the virtual machine, yeah? Why? Because if you look at it, it's got different drawers which are attached to the Chester drawer, which contain things inside of it, yeah? So you've got like your kernel, you've got all of that stuff. All the other stuff that you need to run that particular container is there present, right? You can see that I don't necessarily need to have the Chester drawer present because I can pick up any one of these other drawers, which are like containers. The fact that I have the Chester drawer is just a VM. I don't necessarily need it. I just need what's inside of it. Okay. So now I'm going to just try and tilt the camera a bit more so you can see it. In fact, let me put this down here. Okay. So now, if I was to take this drawer out, yeah, I now have it as that from statement that you can see in front of you. Okay, it's from Python 3.9. So I've gone to the internet, I've looked at Docker Hub, I found that slim image. Okay, now I'm taking this out. Now the workdir is a bit like saying, right, inside of this particular container / image, right, this is the image from the from statement, yeah? Inside of that, I now have like this Prisma skipping rope thing, right? So if you think about the workdir is kind of like saying, right, okay, I want within this particular drawer, I want to then have a directory whereby I can now put my application. Now, if I think about the application could be this mode. Yeah? Because I'm copying the file, which is the app.py, into this directory. Yeah? Okay, with me so far? And within that directory, which is the working directory, it's now within the image called Python 3.9 Slim. This, right, which now makes up our container. From there, I'm going to run something called pip install flask, right, which is the module that we talked about before. Yeah, pip install flask. Now, normally, in a professional environment, what we do is we have something called the requirements.txt file. That requirements.txt file is essentially all the modules that we talked about in terms of building our application. Yeah? So what that means is that that's like the tools within the toolbox. Almost specifically, that's the toolbox itself. Yeah? All of the toolbox that we need to build the tool, right, is going to be specified within the requirements.txt file. We're just not using it in this context. We'll use it a bit later on. Now, expose 5000, we talked about the ports. Yeah? That port is 5000 that we're having that application run on. Now, why is that important? Well, computers have ports. And each port in the computer is attributed to something called a socket. Now, if you think about a port, right, you've got USB port, you've got other USB port, right? One cable. If you've got one cable that goes to one port, you see the problem? Yeah? You can only use one cable for one port, and that's what the computer is doing. So we don't want to use the same port on each cable. That's why we have a list of ports called the uncommon ports to tackle this exact port problem. Because 0 to 124 is called common ports. It means that they're used for certain purposes. Like port 21 is used for FTP. So by having it as a certain port which is above that, now we're giving the computer the chance to say, right, okay, it's very unlikely that this port is going to be in use, so we'll use this port. Okay? Now, we've come a long way since then, because now we have things like proxies, but this is the general gist of it. Now we have CMD, Python, and our file that we're going to run. CMD, Python, and the file that we're going to run essentially means that we are going to run Python with this file. Okay? Pretty straightforward, right? This is just how we're going to run it. Okay, cool. Now, let's go and do exactly that. So I'm going to be using WSL, and I'm going to be using this. So I'm just going to go straight from scratch. If you don't know how to get WSL, very, very simple. It's Ubuntu down here. And there will be, I've got it as an app, but you can get it from the Windows Store if you're on Windows. So Windows Store, it might be Store actually. There we go, Microsoft Store. And in here, you want to search for Ubuntu. This is the one that I like to do for WSL. Okay, and in here you just type or find Ubuntu, open it or install it, and that's it. That's basically it. The reason why I'm in root is because I tried to reset the root password, and got that far. So I'm going to go to my home directory, and then from here I'm going to go to where I was before, which is Mount C uses Docker Learning, which is where I saved all those files that we talked about. So if you've got them all open, just save them inside of a directory. Right? So directory is just the like the filing cabinet that we talked about. It's just where you're going to place the files, essentially. Okay, now, once we have all of that in there, we're going to do a Docker build. Sorry, Docker build. I'm going to say -t, I'm going to say test2, because I already have a test image. Dot just means we're going to build everything that's inside of this directory. That's why we're inside of it, in Docker Learning. And that's why we see all the files. So we press dot like that, and it's built. I already have it installed. I already built the application, which is why it used the cache and went straight forward. In your case, it will take a bit more time. That's fine, right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at Docker images to make sure that we have the image installed. Right, Docker images. In here we can see that test2 is in here, and our size is a 137 MB. Yeah, for test2. So now you're thinking, okay, cool. So I've got an image, right? I've got my containers built, that filing cabinet that we talked about, that particular container, all good. Now what we need to do is we need to run it. So we do a Docker run, test2 in my case, or test, or whatever you want to name it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say port 5000 even. So I've got it the wrong way around. Port 5000 to port 5000, and now we'll say test. So this is the actual command that you want to run. Okay, Docker run -p 5000 test. Press enter. Okay, and now if all is well, you will now see that the application will run. So what will happen is, if I go here, go localhost 5000, Charlie Stock Factory. Yeah, all good. So I hope you've enjoyed what you've learned today. Take it as a good learning experience. And yeah, I hope to see you again soon. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm available for work, so yeah, just let me know.